In Chapter 8, we will be learning about parametric drawing tools. The parametric tools can be used to assist the construction of design and help maintain design intents, which ease the tedious task involved in design modifications. This part here was drawn using parametric tools and geometric constraints. These symbols you see around the part here are the geometric constraints. You'll learn about each of these constraints as well as how I made this in this section. So I'm going to go up to New. I'm going to create a new drawing. It's going to be metric. Okay, the first thing we want to do is we're going to make two arbitrary sized circles. So we're just going to go up to the circle command and click and drag just two arbitrary sized circles of different sizes. Once we've done that, we're going to use the line command out and draw an arbitrary length and angle line. The reason for doing this is we're going to show the true power of the parametric tools that we have here. We're going to make this line horizontal as well as line up these two holes and change their sizes. So we're going to change to the parametric tab up here. And now that we're here, we have the geometric portion of this, which has our different geometric constraints. These constraints are such as the concentric constraint, a perpendicular constraint, coincident constraint. Basically what these do is they conform the geometry to these constraints. As well as we have the dimensional constraints that basically do the same thing. So we can give this size circle a certain diameter and it'll stick to that size. And we can also change these later, which you'll see, which to make design modifications really is simple. So what we're going to do is choose the horizontal constraint, which is this symbol. Notice how the cursor changes to a pick box. Then we'll select the line here. Notice it makes the line horizontal as well as attaches this constraint to it, so we know what constraints are for this line. Once we've done that, we're going to use the coincident constraint, and we're going to choose the end of this line and the circle. Once we've done that, we want to make sure that this becomes our fixed point here. So what we're going to do is choose the lock symbol here, which is a fixed constraint, so everything will be based off of this point right here. Once we have done that, we're going to move this circle to this side over here. To do that, we're going to do the same idea here by choosing the coincident constraint. We're going to choose this into this line and then the circle. Now what we're going to do is give a dimensional constraint for this line. So we're going to use the linear dimension, choose either end of this line, like you would normally, and notice now how you can drag down your dimension. We're going to place a dimension, and now the dimension changes color. So we can actually give this a different size if we want. We can give it, say, a 96, and it changes that line. I'm going to press the Show Dynamic Constraints here so it'll actually show us all of our constraints, and this dimension will pop up again. The great part about this is if we want, we can change this now to a different size, and we'll move all the geometry along with it. So we could change this to, say, by double clicking on it, 120. And again, it changes the side. But we're going to go back to 96. Once we've done that, we're going to go back to the Home Portrait Ribbon Tool panel and click on Line. And we're going to make a line that looks like a shape of something like this. Right click and choose Enter. And I go back to the Parametric panel, and we're going to try and make this line parallel with this line. So we're going to pick the here, choose this line, choose the line we'll make it parallel from. But now notice, however, it moved this line from here. We don't want to do that. We want to bring everything with it. So we're going to undo that, choose Auto Constrain, and we're going to drag our window over this portion. Right click, Enter. Notice how it added the coincident constraints here. So now we're going to redo that parallel command. So we're going to press the parallel constraint, press this line, and then press the line here. Notice how I adjusted everything along with it. Now we're going to use perpendicular constraints and constrain these lines to be perpendicular from each other. Now that we have that, we're going to drop this line down to here. However, if I actually did a coincident constraint here with this line and this circle, it wouldn't place it right. So we're going to undo that, and we're going to use a tangent constraint this time, so it'll always place this line tangent to the top of the circle. Choose this line, and then choose a circle. And it raises the circle to the length of this line. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shift this whole line over by using the coincident constraint. I'm going to choose the end of this line, right click and choose Object, and choose the circle. Notice how it brought it back. And what we're going to do here to adjust this is we're going to just simply drag this over here, so it'll be in the right orientation for the rest of this drawing. We're going to do the same thing with the tangent constraint with this line and this circle. And then we're going to use the coincident, and we're going to choose this in this line, right click and choose Object and the circle. So now that we have that, the next thing we want to do is I want to adjust the size of these circles. So to do that, I'm going to use the radial command up here. Oh, not the diameter. Use the radial, which is the one next to it. And we're going to choose the side circle here. And notice how the radial dimension pops up. We want to give this first one a radial dimension of 20. And we want to give the bigger circle a radial dimension of 30. Now, once we've done that, we're going to go back to the home portion of the panel and choose the 3-point arc. That way we're going to make a rough sketch of a 3-point arc here. Again, of just arbitrary size and location. And we go back to the parametric panel and we will give it a radial dimension of 15. Once we've done that, we're going to use a constraint to constrain the end of this to this point. Then we're going to use a tangent constraint and constrain the line tangent to that arc. And then use this constraint to constrain the end of this to this line. Once we've done that, we're going to now mirror this top half to the bottom. So we're going to go back to Home, and under the Modify toolbar, choose Mirror, and drag a window from right to left over this top portion. Right click and choose a mirror point, which will use the center point of this circle, and then we'll choose a line in this direction. It'll ask us if we want to erase the source objects, and we don't, so no is fine. Enter, and notice now how we have the same thing mirrored down here. Now that we have this, we're going to trim away the excess geometry. So we're going to get out the Trim tool, the Modify toolbar. We're going to select the excess geometry. Right click. We want to get rid of that portion of the circle and this line and this part of the circle. Right click and enter. And now we want to just individually select these lines and erase them. Now if we go back to Parametric, notice how since we trimmed away some of that geometry, it also trimmed away the constraints that went along with it. So what we're going to do to fix that is use the Auto Constrain button, which you might use more often than others. And we're going to click the Auto Constrain, drag a window over the entire part, right click and choose Enter. Notice now how all of our constraints showed back up. Once we've done that, we're going to redimension some of these things like the radius of these arcs. So we're going to use a radial constraint, 20, enter if it's the constraint you want, and then we'll choose the radial again and choose this arc. And we still want it to be 30, so we're just going to left click and press enter. Now we're going to give a linear dimension for these two lines. Just place it up here, and the dimension should be 60. Enter. Notice how it drags all the geometry along with it and the correct constraints. We do that linear dimension one more time for the bottom here. It should be 60 as well. Now we're going to make some room, and we're going to go to Home and choose the center radius circle and make 4 arbitrary size circles. So I'm just going to use the space bar to repeat the command. Now we're going to go back to Parametric and get out the diameter constraint, and we want to give the first one 20, enter, repeat, and we're going to reselect the command again, left click and give it a diameter of 30. Again, this one will be 10. And lastly, this one will be 20. Now once we've done that, we're going to use concentric constraints and then place these at the center point of this circle and this circle. So I'm going to use a concentric constraint, choose 2 circles. I'm going to use it again and choose one of these circles and then this big circle. Then I'm going to use it for this circle and this circle. And now this little circle needs to be placed at a location up here. So we're going to use a combination of horizontal and vertical dimension constraints. So I'm going to use a horizontal constraint and constrain it from this center point to its center point of 48. And then we use a vertical constraint and constrain it from this line to the center point of the circle of 0. Notice how it brought it back up to that line, and also it's in line with this guy. So now, if we want, this looks kind of cluttered, so we actually can turn off showing dynamic constraints as well as hide all geometric constraints. Delete this line here. And now you have your part.